Marty Scurll and the Bullet Club were at one point one of the hottest things in wrestling, but fast forward to now, and all those Bullet Club members from then are now in AEW and WWE, whereas Marty Scurll is nowhere to be found in either, and his career is pretty much dead in the water. So how did this happen? All that and more today as we discuss the career and downfall of the villain Marty Scurll. Make sure to subscribe, and let's begin. Marty Scurll made his debut in 2005 and throughout the next few years would begin wrestling throughout the UK, mainly in the promotion IPW UK. He would actually spend the next 10 years wrestling for IPW UK semi-regularly, even when he was starting to get popular in the West. He stayed loyal to them. In IPW, he was a multi-time champion, even winning the tag championships with Zack Sabre Jr. And Scurll's first big break in America wouldn't come until 2012, however, when he became involved with the promotion that we all know and love called TNA. TNA held British Boot Camp Season 1, a reality show that followed 4 promising British wrestlers who were mentored by wrestling veterans, and the winner was signed to TNA. The 4 contestants were Scurll, Hannah and Holly, the Blossom Twins, and Rockstar Spud. And because of the British Boot Camp, it meant he got to have one match in TNA where he teamed with the Blossom Twins in a losing effort to Jesse Goddard, Tara, and Gail Kim in an episode of Impact when he was using the name Party Marty. Marty Scurll would not win British Boot Camp Season 1, however, as it was Rockstar Spud, who we now know as Drake Maverick, who would go on to win, which was 1000% the correct decision. Drake Maverick was incredible. And from here, the next few years for Marty would see him really rise up in the wrestling world. He'd start wrestling for the newly formed Progress Wrestling in 2012, and in Progress, he was a 2-time Progress World Champion, having beaten Will Ospreay the first time to win it, and defended it against such names as Chris Hero and Tommy End. And he was wrestling elsewhere in the UK, places like ICW, Rev Pro, promotions that are still around today. And it was in these promotions he got to face some major talent. He faced the likes of Ricochet, Kevin Steen, Doug Williams, Shelton Benjamin, and even AJ Styles, who he lost the Rev Pro World title to. So yeah, Marty Scurll was really wrestling some big names and starting to grow his brand and get his name out there more, and he would begin expanding to America and wrestling in promotions there. In October 2015, he would wrestle with Jeff Jarrett's GFW, which I know in hindsight that doesn't look amazing, but at the time GFW had a tiny bit of hype around it and there was some money in it, so was never a bad opportunity for a wrestler. He'd wrestle for the world title and the next gen title while in GFW, both in losing efforts, but it was some decent sized exposure in America for Marty. He made his PWG debut in the 2015 Battle of Los Angeles, and PWG at this time were probably the biggest American indie promotion, just supercards every single show, and obviously PWG was so influential to what we see in wrestling today. And in the Battle of Los Angeles, he defeated Rich Swann and Trevor Lee to make it to the semi-finals, where he did lose to Zack Sabre Jr. Marty Scurll was now pretty much a permanent fixture in the American independent scene, and the next year in the 2016 PWG Battle of Los Angeles, he had much better luck, as he would win the tournament, defeating huge names like Pentagon and Cody Rhodes to win it. In that same year of 2016, he would also sign for Ring of Honor, and this is where his career would be taken to the next level. He signed for Ring of Honor in August of 2016 and very quickly would win the TV title from Will Ospreay in November. He would hold this title for 5 months and defend it against the likes of Will Ospreay, Dragon Lee, Kazarian, Adam Cole, and hell, even Ken Anderson. During New Japan and Ring of Honor's co-promoted War of the Worlds tour, Marty Scurll was revealed as the newest member of the Bullet Club, replacing Adam Cole. And while he would also lose the TV title on this tour, that kind of didn't really matter now that he was in the Bullet Club, because joining the Bullet Club was massive. The Bullet Club at this time were at their peak. They were the biggest thing in wrestling outside of the WWE. And the next year was easily the peak year for the Bullet Club. This was the time when they had their shirts in Hot Topic, they had their Funko Pops made of them, and they were wrestling all across the country and all across the world in New Japan and Ring of Honor. In New Japan, Scurll would have a brief 2-month reign of the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title from November 2017 to January 2018, and a few months later, he would win the Never Openweight 6-man tag titles alongside fellow Bullet Club members the Young Bucks, which they would hold for 4 months. Scurll was also involved in the widely successful All all-in event in a sold-out All-State Arena in September 2018, where he had a 26-minute match of the night contender, losing to Kazuchika Okada. It was the semi-main of the night and easily the biggest match he had ever competed in his career to date. And it was also kind of the beginning of the end for Marty Scurll. You see, the All-In event was attended by a man by the name of Tony Khan, whom afterwards would initiate discussions with Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks, and they would form All Elite Wrestling. And with that, Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks, Hangman Page, and Kenny Omega, who were all part of the Bullet Club and obviously the Elite, would exit Ring of Honor to go to All Elite Wrestling, and Marty Scurll would not follow them. He would remain in Ring of Honor, and by this point Ring of Honor's roster was very scarce, and Ring of Honor was a shell of what it used to be. In 2019 there was the G1 Supercard show in Madison Square Garden, which was the show co-promoted by Ring of Honor and New Japan, and while it was a big thing that they had a show at MSG, Ring of Honor's side of the show just wasn't too great. You had Matt Taven winning the title, which wasn't really a bad thing, but it kind of just signified how far Ring of Honor had fallen. Then you had Enzo and Cass do their shoot/work debut, and Ring of Honor's relationship with New Japan would ultimately end after this show. And throughout all of 2019, Ring of Honor would really tread in the water. You didn't really hear much about them. AEW was the new hot thing. WWE was still doing its thing, the Wednesday Night War. Ring of Honor was sort of just pushed to the side. But going into 2020, Scurll would actually turn down the opportunity to go to AEW because he would re-sign with Ring of Honor and actually became the head booker as well. But then the pandemic happened, and Ring of Honor was off TV, and no events were being run. And then the very end would come for Marty Scurll during the pandemic. During the pandemic, the Speaking Out movement took place. It was a movement within the wrestling industry in which victims of abuse within the wrestling industry came out with their stories. And in this movement, a lot of wrestlers got exposed and lost their careers as a result of it. And one of those people was Marty Scurll. Marty Scurll was accused by a woman of sexually abusing her 5 years prior when she was 16 years old and intoxicated. Scurll would respond to the allegation by admitting that the incident did take place, but he insisted that it was consensual. Ring of Honor would launch their own investigation into the allegation against him, and when Ring of Honor returned back to TV and running events again, Scurll didn't return with them, and his profile was eventually removed from the Ring of Honor website in October of 2020. 3 months later, in January of 2021, it was announced by Ring of Honor and Marty Scurll that they had mutually agreed to depart ways, effective immediately. Since then, Marty Scurll can be nowhere to be found in any sort of mainstream wrestling level. He still wrestles to this day, but you'll only be able to find him in the Mexican wrestling scene where he has taken refuge, and as well he does occasionally wrestle in Europe and sometimes in America, but like I said, he doesn't wrestle on any sort of mainstream level, and there's no way we'd ever see a company like your AEWs, WWE, Impact, or New Japan sign him. From being part of one of the hottest wrestling groups and easily the hottest thing in wrestling outside of WWE, to being pretty much irrelevant in wrestling in 2023. That is the story of Marty Scurll.